Today we're talking about the top 5 junglers as of patch 4.17. For this we'll mostly or almost exclusively go by the statistics from the pro matches, seeing which guards were picked the most, were banned the most, and how successfully they showed up in those games. Whereas my personal opinion will only play a very minor role in this context and is mostly there to explain why the guards are where they are. So this is not a personal opinion piece, but rather statistics, and as such you can disagree with it, but the statistics are there. With that said, let's talk about why the guards are where they are and which guards nearly made it but didn't quite make it. To begin, we have a bruiser meta at the moment. If you've missed this, warriors are kind of very dominant in the jungle at this point. They have the base damage, they have the early pressure that's needed, but they also have a very nice transition into late game where they can act as a frontliner, as a damagey bruiser depending on the situation, what's required, and are very flexible as such. A lot of this potential comes from this season's option to go for 2 starter items at the same time, which work much better for warriors overall than they do for assassins in their functionality. The reasons go beyond that, but that should cover the basics. With a warrior meta, you also get certain guards that are strong against warriors, or that may not necessarily be warriors, but kind of play like them in a way that kind of can go up in the meta along with them. One of those would be the first guard that didn't quite make it, and that's Thor. Thor was picked a decent amount of times and banned a few times as well. He is being built more bruiser sometimes, even starting with a death toll again instead of a bluestone sometimes. And the reason is that Thor is kind of a bruisery assassin that still gets a lot of early game damage off, but benefits from going into a more tanky build for setup late game. The difference between Thor and others is that his late game damage in a bruiser build is not quite as high, whereas he is more there for CC through his ultimate and his wall, so others can just do a little more late game when looking for a more bruiser oriented path. He's by no means bad, but he's also by no means the best. So he's kinda in the upper middle field, so to speak, where he's one of the picks that will often get chosen when the priority picks are banned. The next one who is nearly up there is Serket. Serket was actually not picked that much, but she was banned a lot. With Serket, there's always the reason that she's a counter to specific guards, especially if you want to put a Hell on the field, then you want to ban out Serket, and even self-healing guards mostly, or like slightly team-healing guards like Artio, kinda want you to have Serket off the table. So there are various guards that kinda don't want to get that anti-heal pushed onto them, and the single target burst can also be very dangerous for certain immobile targets. Same as the high mobility just being overall annoying. But she isn't the best when it comes to bruiser builds, and that's where her weakness lies at the moment. So she does still do what she always did, and as such she still performs very well, but others just do the job overall a little bit better than her, while she's by no means bad. And in the same place we can find Susanoo. Susanoo also very high mobility, high damage, a little bit more teamfight damage in return for not as much anti-heal or not as much utility. The big ultimate that can set up when it is working out properly for you and your team and the enemy doesn't, well, anticipate it beforehand. But he also, again, doesn't benefit that much from a tankier build. They both don't have the highest base values and, well, they won't have as much impact in a team fight when they cannot burst someone. And when the enemy is another warrior, then bursting them is quite hard. The last one that nearly made it was Ao Kuang, and if we were talking about ranked specifically here, I would say Ao Kuang should be in the top 5. In the SPL, not too many players are looking to play him. Joni likes to play him, and he was banned out against the puppies, but he doesn't seem to be as popular there yet, so he's more of a niche strategy for certain jungle players. I think he has potential to climb up, especially since he is a decent counter to tanks as well, with the new builds that are coming up for him and everything. So I do see potential for him over certain others, maybe a bit later down the road. Some honorable mentions go out to some other warrior junglers that we saw, Erlang Shen, Sun Wukong, and we also saw a tanky Athena jungle, but those aren't quite the top ones at the moment. Some other cool picks that we saw were Ragin and Willish as well as Habois in the Challenger Cup, so there are some interesting jungle picks going around, but now we get to the actual top 5. In place number 5 we have Raven. Now Raven could have easily been a higher pick looking at the weeks before this one, but Raven recently got nerfed and the nerf was decently heavy. With how dominant his performance was beforehand, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, and I do think that he could potentially drop out of the top 5 quite easily. He's still picked, he's still banned at the moment, but there may be other guards that just take his spot instead, especially those other tankier ones or one of the ones I mentioned before. Yet still, he has almost unparalleled early aggression, he has good setup with his root, and he can engage into a backline quite easily with his ultimate, which will still make him a threat. It's just a little more towards mid-game with his ultimate being leveled up for more impact now. So he absolutely fulfills the same function as before, he just happens to have a bit of a different power spike, a little less overall, but he still played exactly the same and he still will have the same impact on a game as in how the enemy has to play around him. Now I will give you a build for Raven as well, but we'll do that after the next guard because they actually share a build. The next guard is Odin. Odin has also received various nerfs in the recent patch. Those nerfs seem to hit him quite heavy, but the pros still value him. He's still being picked, he's still being banned, and I do think that he has a bit more potential than Raven after the nerfs, which is mostly down to the fact that he still has his ultimate. His ultimate will always provide a team with a lot of utility, will always give him late game viability, and will always counter out healers. And especially in a meta where some healers do very well, something like that can never be undervalued. And his burst is still really good, so that shouldn't be underestimated either. Really, Odin is in a good spot. Early on, he just has that early aggression, very high damage spike, that can blow up any squishy or any immobile target if they don't pay attention, so that threat is always there, and in late game he can always set up for his team. Now for the build. This is just a very simple build, they all have many options and how exactly you want to build them. This one is one where you can't go all too wrong with. You want to start the build with Bumba's Mask and Bluestone Pendant. On Raven you can also consider Death Toll if you prefer that, and then you go into Warrior Tabi in both cases. After that, you go into Heartseeker, but the reasons are a little bit different for both guards here. Raven just has a chance to proc this multiple times in a fight due to the fact that he sticks to enemies quite long and hits many basic attacks, whereas with Odin, he will probably just proc it once. But the point here is that his Bird Bomb will deal a ridiculous amount of damage when tied with Heartseeker, and the enemy will not expect that damage most of the time, and it can just be quite crazy. If you have the 2 active, the 1 active and the Heartseeker, you can pop someone's half health at least quite easily. After that, as we're going for a safe route here, you want to build Height of the Urchin just to get that tankiness going. Then you get a bruiser item being Masamune, giving you a bit of all the stats you need, a bit of mobility, a bit of damage and a bit of protection. Then you build Spirit Robe or Mantle of Discord depending on which one you prefer and the situation. If there's a lot of CC on the enemy team, you're rather leaning towards Spirit Robe. If you want to CC the enemy team more, you want to provide your team with more utility, it is Mantle of Discord. And then last but not least, you can get another defensive item if you want to counter someone, or just Titan's Bane if you want more damage. And that brings us to spot number 3, which is a bit more unexpected. But this guy has actually been picked a lot and banned quite a few times as well. You don't exactly always know what the ban is for, which role the ban is for when we're talking about a warrior. But this one is Osiris. Osiris was picked quite frequently, I think 5 or 6 times. And he does bring a lot to the table that has been undervalued for a long time and is starting to show now. Being a tanky warrior that has pretty good base stats at this point, but also a lot of sustain, he just kinda personifies what the meta has shaped into, and different from the others, he doesn't have any nerfs to his name at the moment that would warrant him dropping lower. Early game Osiris cannot be overestimated. He's got a ridiculous amount of lockdown. He can just slow you constantly. He has a very easy way of following up. He has free sustain through Death Toll, and he has a lot of damage to his abilities as well at the moment. So pretty much anything he does will work against you in the early game, and you have to play very carefully against him, and you can pretty much not poke him out unless you're fighting him with multiple people. In late game, he's got a ridiculous amount of damage mitigation and lockdown against a team if he just goes into the team, as well as anti-heal on top of that, just as an icing on the cake. As a build, I would recommend Death Toll, Warrior or Ninja Tabi depending on preference, then Heartseeker. Again, you're gonna hit a lot of hits so you can proc it multiple times. Height of the Urchin for the tankiness, Masamune once again as before, Spirit Robe or Mantle of Discord. I would lean a little bit more towards Mantle of Discord here because you have so much damage mitigation already, but in some situations you will need more of that. And as a last item, I would not get Titan's Bane, I would get Executioner just because you land so many hits and the attack speed will help you. And that brings us to place number 2. picked 9 times and banned 4 times, different levels of success, and a ridiculous amount of different builds. And that's Nemesis for you. I would say that in casual, she will not perform quite as well as in ranked, because a lot of her kit just revolves around the ultimate still, and that setup potential that comes with it. But still, she is the tank melter, which works against all the other tanks that we have in the meta at the moment, and she got buffed quite a while ago, which helps her with that rough early game she had before. Her playstyle varies as much as her builds. You often want to look for attack cancels with a 3, you want to look to burst down a target with your ultimate and then just unleashing a combo on them. And those are pretty much the things that are true for all the builds, because everything else kind of nuances depending on the build. Even in the SPL, we've seen a tank melter build with stone cutting sword and executioner. We've seen a build that included haste and katana. We've seen a crit with wind demon and deathbringer. We've seen heartseeker. We've seen it all. What I would propose as a more standard build that isn't too hard to execute would be Bluestone or Death Toll, once again a matter of preference, Warrior Tabi, Jotun's Wrath, so a bit more ability damage early, and then Heartseeker, which you can proc quite reliably multiple times, again the same thing here, Stonecutting Sword to get a little bit more protection reduction while you're not needing as much of it, Kin Size, you can also go with Executioner here obviously if the enemy team is tanky enough for that. You always have to consider how much protection reduction do I need when I have the ultimate, and Spirit Robe. Very simple build, more ability focused with a little bit of extra oomph for your basic attacks through Kin Size, but you can also switch around here, go for Ninja Tabi instead, and basically change up almost every item because she's so super flexible. And that brings us to the undisputed, absolute king of jungle at the moment, and that is without a doubt Camazotz. Camazotz was picked 12 times and frequently banned, and to be honest, he has it all at the moment. Camazotz is the kind of assassin that can go very bruisery because he has the base damage anyways, so you can basically play him like a warrior, but he also has that early aggression, that early kill potential, and everything that kind of works with his meta. His ultimate allows for very high amounts of early aggression. He has the slow to set up for the team as well, and even though he doesn't have too much CC in his build overall, he just makes up for it with the damage and with the sustain and the tankiness and everything. I don't even need to go into more detail here. All I'll say is I would be surprised if he's not nerfed within at least the next 2 patches, if not the next patch. As for a simple build for him, consider Bluestone, Warrior Tabi, Jotun's Wrath, Heartseeker, Broader's Beatstick, Titan's Bane, and Spirit Robe. This build is more ability focused and works with a high power scaling on his heal. You can obviously go for more tanky builds as well if you want to, but I do think that this one works pretty decently for him. That's it for the current top 5 junglers. I would like to see some more assassins in there again instead of so many warriors. Hopefully that will happen over time. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this type of content, let me know in the comments. Feel free to subscribe and click the bell if you want to see more like this. See you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth out.